Gnome. The small Argentine town of General Güemes sits quietly beneath wide star-scattered skies, the kind of place where neighbors know each other by name and evenings are spent in easy conversation on street corners. It is the kind of town where nothing unusual ever happens. At least, that is what its residents believed until the night of 2008 that changed everything. It began as an ordinary evening. Marco Reyes and a group of his friends had gathered together, as young men in small towns often do, to pass the late hours with laughter and stories. Their conversation drifted lazily to their last fishing trip, the ones that got away, the cold morning air on the water, the simple pleasure of good company. It was past midnight. The world around them was quiet and still. Marco, almost without thinking, pulled out his mobile phone and began filming. There was nothing in particular to capture, just his friends joking around, the dark street stretching behind them, the familiar sounds of a sleeping town. Then something changed. A sound cut through the laughter. Strange, sharp, like stones being thrown, but from where and by whom? The group fell silent, exchanging uneasy glances. Then the grass at the edge of their vision began to move. To begin with, we thought it was a dog, Marco would later recall, his voice still carrying the tremor of that night. But it was not a dog. From the shifting grass, something emerged, small, deliberate, and deeply wrong. It moved with an unnatural sideways gait, its silhouette unlike anything the group had seen before. A figure, hunched, unmistakably shaped like the gnomes of old folklore, those ancient, unsettling creatures that exist at the edges of legend and nightmare. When we saw this gnome-like figure begin to emerge, we were really afraid, Marco said simply. No embellishment was needed. The footage captured by Marco that night spread rapidly, igniting both fascination and dread far beyond General Güemes. But what made this case more than a single viral video was what followed. In the days and weeks after the initial sighting, other locals came forward quietly, hesitantly, as people do when they fear they will not be believed. They had seen it too, on dark streets, near fields, moving in that same horrible sideways shuffle. A pall of fear settled over the town like fog that refused to lift. Parents kept children inside after dark. Groups of friends no longer lingered on corners past midnight. The easy, carefree rhythm of small-town life was broken, replaced by something watchful and anxious. What exactly was captured on that footage remains officially unexplained. Skeptics offered theories: a person in costume, a trick of shadow and light, the power of suggestion amplified by a grainy mobile phone camera. But those who were there that night in General Güemes, those who heard the sound of stones thrown by invisible hands, who watched the grass tremble and part, they did not need a theory. They had seen it with their own eyes. And in that town, beneath those wide Argentine skies, some things that emerge from the darkness in the dead of night cannot be so easily explained away. Chapter 2. Devil's Breath. The first night, February 1850. The snowfall that descended upon Devon, England in February of 1850 seemed at first unremarkable. A light dusting had settled across the countryside overnight, enough to coat the fields and rooftops in a thin, clean layer of white, enough to muffle the world into silence. It was the kind of quiet, gentle snowfall that the people of Devon had seen 100 times before. But when they stepped outside the next morning, they found that something had used the night and the snow to leave behind a message. Stretching across the countryside for over 100 miles, a trail of hoof-like marks had been pressed into the snow. Each print measured between 1.5 and 2.5 inches wide, spaced approximately 8 inches apart, moving in a pattern that was deeply, disturbingly deliberate. The print did not wander. They did not circle or double back the way an animal trail might. For the greater part of their course, they followed straight, undeviating lines, the stride of something that knew exactly where it was was going, and nothing at all stood in its way. Houses lay directly in the path of the trail. The footprints went straight over them, appearing on snow-covered rooftops as clearly as they did on open ground. High walls that should have stopped any living creature showed the same prints on both sides, the snow on top undisturbed, as though whatever had passed simply ceased to obey the rules of physical space. Haystack, rivers, and open fields were crossed with equal indifference. Most unsettling of all were the drain pipes. In several locations, the trail led directly up the opening of a drain, some as small as 4 inches in diameter, and then reappeared on the other side. Not even the smallest creature could have passed through openings so narrow, and yet the prints continued, steady and even, as though no obstacle had existed at all. The people of Devon stood in the cold morning air, stared at the trail stretching across their world, and felt the ground shift beneath their feet, not physically, but in the way it shifts. Something you have always believed about the nature of reality is suddenly called into question. The clergy did not hesitate in their verdict. From pulpits across the south of England, the hoofprints were declared the work of demonic forces, the tracks of Satan himself, walking the earth in the darkness while Christian men and women slept. The cloven hoof, after all, was one of the oldest and most recognized marks of the devil. Here it was, pressed into the snow of Devon, stretching 100 miles across their countryside, climbing their roof, threading through their drain pipe. Fear spread through the towns and villages like frost creeping across glass, but fear in some men hardens into something else. Armed groups formed. Farmers, laborers, and townspeople took up whatever weapons they had and set out to follow the trail, track down whatever beast had left these marks, and bring it to ground. They followed the straight, relentless line of prints across fields and over walls, through the freezing Devon countryside, torches burning against the dark. They found nothing. The trail simply continued, indifferent to the men chasing it, until it ended not at a lair, not at a body, not at any place that made sense. It simply stopped as mysteriously as it had begun. The snow melted, spring came, the footprints disappeared, and Devon slowly, cautiously returned to ordinary life. The story passed into legend, one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Victorian age, spoken of in hushed voices and debated by historians and investigators for generations. 150 years, and then it happened again. In September 1931, the Irving family of the Isle of Man began hearing strange scratching and rustling noises behind the wooden wall panels of their farmhouse. At first, they assumed it was simply a rat, but as the days went on, the sounds grew increasingly bizarre. The creature would spin like a ferret, growl like a dog, and then produce a wet, unsettling gurgle, eerily similar to that of a human baby. Whatever was hiding behind those walls was no ordinary animal. Then, one extraordinary day, the creature spoke. It introduced itself as Jeff, claiming to be a mongoose born in New Delhi, India, in the year 1852. That would have made Jeff nearly 80 years old, a biological impossibility for any known creature. Jeff, however, seemed completely unbothered by this fact. The only family member to ever get a clear look at Jeff was Victorian Irving, the young daughter of the household. She described him as roughly the size of a small rat, covered in yellowish fur, with a large and unusually bushy tail. Jeff seemed to trust Victorian above all others, and was deeply reluctant to reveal himself to anyone else. His explanations for his own existence were wildly inconsistent. Sometimes he claimed to be an extraordinarily intelligent mongoose. Other times he called himself an earthbound spirit, or a ghost that had chosen the form of a weasel. But perhaps his most chilling statement was when he seemed to acknowledge his own unnatural nature directly. "I am a freak," Jeff reportedly told the family. "I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you would faint. You would be petrified, mummified, turned to stone, or a pillar of salt." Word of the talking mongoose spread quickly. Journalists and paranormal investigators made their way to the Irving farmhouse, known as Cashin's Gap, eager to witness Jeff themselves. Most left disappointed. Jeff would fall completely silent in the presence of strangers, as though fully aware he was being tested. Some visitors reported hearing faint, unexplained sounds. Others heard nothing and left convinced it was all an elaborate hoax. The Irving family never changed their story. They sought no fame and no money from the experience, which gave their account a quiet credibility that was difficult to dismiss entirely. Voirrey Irving, who had been Jeff's closest companion during those strange years, carried the story with her for the rest of her life. She passed away in 2005. In one of her final interviews, she made a statement that has stayed with researchers ever since. Jeff, she said firmly, was not her creation. She had not invented him, performed any tricks, or deceived anyone. Whatever Jeff truly was, animal spirit, or something beyond explanation, Voirrey maintained until her last breath that he had been completely real. The case of Jeff the Mongoose has never been solved. It remains one of the strangest and most enduring mysteries of the 20th century.